Thank you.
Hello.
Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
Hi.
Here we are.
So good to see you.
You too.
It feels like it's been too long.
It has. I've been asking permission of all the lakes again if I can bend the river back into the city. So I went up to swim in the glacial snow melts up
Wow.
up above like about 14,000 feet. And then I went into the volcanic meadows and got into the hot sulfur springs and asked permission there.
Oh,
Where was this?
I'm up in Paya Hunadu, up in the Eastern Sierra.
Whoa, that's so cool.
Yeah, so I just got back in time for this.
perfect.
Yay. And I love that you're asking permission and like yeah, just kinship with
Yeah.
natural system.
Also-
You're embodying that principle.
It feels so different, and when you kind of go to the glacial snow melt and go swimming in it and walk around the edge and see all the mushrooms that are growing and little critters that are landing on your nose, dragonflies, and I saw bald eagle, Diego.
I was in the Sierra too. In Northern California, I saw a bald eagle the other day. It was so cool.
And I saw bald eagle and golden eagle.
Oh my gosh.
Over the same lake.
I also saw two American dippers. Have you ever seen one?
No.
They're songbirds, but they like swim in the water and they get little invertebrates underneath, and they're like really they're just kind of drab and gray looking, but they're super cool and unique. They call them dippers because it looks like they're always doing little squats, like going like that. You only find them in really like high mountain
I
streams.
love those guys.
How nice. Kelly, I can't wait
Nice.
to show you the Owens Valley. You're definitely coming up here. We just harvested
I know.
watercress, wild watercress out of a native stream for dinner tonight. It's just
Wow.
incredible.
That's amazing.
All right, I guess we have to let the party begin.
Guys, am I breaking up?
No.
Yes,
Oh.
oh no, I thought, well, she's frozen on my
You
screen.
guys?
You are frozen on mine all of a sudden.
No, yeah, Kelly is frozen on mine too.
So weird.
Kelly, maybe log off and log back in if you can hear us.
Okay.
And Cindy, if you can send a message to people waiting that we'll be letting them in any second.
Okay.
And Diego, if you could work on your filters.
I'm just gonna get like some prop and hold it up in front of myself.
You're gonna go old school filter.
Yeah, I don't have anything I can use though. Gee,
Oh, there she's okay. Yeah, she was frozen.
here's my old school filter.
Back. Okay, let's try it. How about now? Can't
I'm
hear you.
feeling better. Oh, you guys waited for me.
We did.
I think it's better. If
Yeah.
I, in the middle of my intro, if I just get a weird frozen face like this, and somebody pick up the ball and just keep moving, okay?
We'll
No
mute you.
problemo.
Actually, if it starts to cut out, just turn your video off. That sometimes helps too.
Okay, cool. I'll do that. Okay, I'm ready to ramble.
All righty.
All right, we're ready. I'll
Ramble
let them in.
strong.
Do it. Cindy, I'll let you handle letting him in.
All right. I'm gonna be dramatic and let people in one by one.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Learning and Mending. As people are starting to come into the Squarespace, I'm going to share with you all this week's embroidery of the week. And one of the main reasons I picked it, besides it's absolutely lovely, is that it features the chain stitch that we learned last week in our YouTube video. And this was done by Livia, who I don't think is on tonight, but it is absolutely beautiful. And the whole thing is a chain stitch, which gives a lot of delicate and depth to it. And I'm just going to show you the back as well. I think it's just, I mean, I'm envious of how perfectly clean her back is, because mine looks like a crazy mess of string that I basically hide and tie down at the very end. But this is Livia's, and I will put that up. And then again, as we're waiting for people to come in, we're gonna just do a quick popcorn share introduction, who you are, where you are, and what you're working on tonight. So I'll start. I'm Jen. I am calling in from Studio City, and I am working close to finishing my mycelium root carbon exchange network. So I'm going to just finish that outline tonight. And I think I'm also going to go over the green with a little bit of like a gray, just to give it a little bit more texture. So I will pass that to Olan.
Hello, happy to be here, calling in from West Hollywood using she, her pronouns. I'd like to show that the chain stitch is already incorporated into my many parameciums, or whatever it is that I am.
Woo! Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
And I will pass it on to Cindy.
Hi, I'm Cindy. I'm calling in from West Covina, and I'm also working on the same pattern that Olan's working on, but I've not gone as far as her, and hers is really pretty. I'll try to catch up. I will pass it on to Izzy.
Hello, my name's Izzy. My pronouns are they, she. I'm calling in from East Hollywood. And tonight I'm working on this underground embroidery. And I will pass it on to Kelly.
I'm the only Kelly tonight? Okay.
Yes.
I'm Kelly, calling in from Seattle. I'm really dying for a mending kit, a plug to Jen, but I haven't got one yet. So I'm gonna do some sketching tonight. Sorry, Jen. Sorry, but I really want to get one.
Yeah, we put one in the mail like 3 weeks ago.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh,
We did.
okay.
But
we
this is-
have a missing mycelium in the airwaves is what's happening.
We'll work on getting you another one.
Okay.
So
Okay.
strange.
We know where to get one. Send it right out.
But yeah, I'm calling in from Seattle, and I'll probably doodle or paint or something. Oh, and then I will go with Marianne.
Hi everyone, I'm in Silver Lake. I'm she, her. I've got it's very kind of pale, but let's see, how do I hold that up right?
Right there.
I just started here. I'm using the colors I have and mixing them together. So this is kind of a mint and one strand of mint and one strand of green, but it's not really showing up that much now. So be patient with me. Thank you. I will pass it to Cynthia. Or no, Cynthia passed it to me. And Kelly, who can I see here? Kavi?
Good evening, everyone. Kavi calling in from Sacramento. Use he, him pronouns, and still working on my hermit thrush. And I've got a goal of finishing it this week. And as Jen pointed out last week, I also didn't I didn't start with a bird either. I'll pass it over to Roxanne.
Hi, I'm Roxanne calling in from Venice, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm still working slowly on my raven, common raven. And I will pass it to Lauren.
Thanks, Roxanne. I'm Lauren. I'm using she, they pronouns. I'm calling from Paya Hunadu. I'm working on a mycelium network.
Ooh.
And
Ooh.
I pass it to Ansu.
Amazing.
Hey, thank you so much for letting me slide in because I was late. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Silver Lake and I am making progress on my soil microbiota or whatever this is. And somehow, I don't know who it was, maybe Jen, who showed us the French knot. So I went ahead and practiced it. And so I've got some French knots going.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So thanks for inspiring that. I looked it up.
Oh, that's great.
So who has not gone? Cynthia, Millie, Izzy, Michelle, have you gone?
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Michelle, calling from Highland Park, pronoun he, they. I'm going to do some sketching. I don't know why yet. Happy to be here, and I would like to hear from, is Mark Rice still here? He was on the screen before. If not, Nancy Clem.
Hey, hey everyone, happy to join you. I'm actually seated someplace physically. I'm in my garden in Chicago, and I don't have the attention span right now to do embroidery, so I'm actually just scribbling and kind of taking down notes, and it's a lot later here for us, so I'm glad I'm here. Who hasn't been heard from?
I can go next, Nance. It's Millie.
Oh,
Good to
hi,
see
Millie.
you here.
Hi, Millie.
Hi, I'm Millie. I'm zooming in from Paya Hunadu. I currently have this beautiful big sagebrush that Lauren and I just harvested together, and we're going to bundle tonight. And yeah, really, really happy to be here. Let's see who else hasn't gone. Olan, next.
Was that me? Because I've already.
I'll actually take it at this point, and if you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself, you can at the end. Right now, I'm going to share with you the blanket stitch tutorial, which I think is a great tutorial for anybody that's doing the microscope. The outside, it can be a great border. So let me share that with you. Let's see if it's okay, and full screen. Here we go. that is the blanket stitch. So I'm hoping that you picked that up and will incorporate it into this week's design. I will put the link in the chat so you can watch it again. And now we'll begin with this evening. So the Metabox Studios Learning and Mending series is now in its 5th iteration. In this series, from micro to macro, we will be exploring the implications of an integrated form of systems thinking that allows us to think across all scales, from particle, cell, brain, society, ecosystem, to cosmic matter. From micro to macro, we'll build upon what we learned about from Anna Singh's disturbance ecology and have an emphasis on complexity, networks, and patterns of organization. Many of you have received embroidery kits from us of native plants, birds, and microscopic organisms that Metabox Studio is currently cultivating on its project sites. Taken as a collection, all the embroideries will collectively illustrate biogeoconosis, which describes the intimate association between living things and the physical environment. If you have not received a kit or would like another one, please send your name and mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org. Tonight, we will share our screen, and we encourage you to read a section of the text aloud with us. When there is a pause in the reading, please feel free to unmute yourself and begin where the last person left off. Silence is golden, and there is no pressure to fill the transitional spaces while we enjoy a breath and continue crafting. Feel free to jump in and continue reading at your comfort level. You don't have to read, it's also fine to enjoy listening. And now I will pass it over to Kelly, and she will introduce tonight's readings.
Thank you, Jen. The music with that video was really good for me tonight. Thank you for letting.
I know, I enjoyed that one.
Part.
You don't get a choice in that one, but that was a good one.
I was feeling it. Yeah, so tonight we're going to look at social systems. We're going to be, some interesting topics in tonight's readings, just as a high level overview, looking at social systems, how they're influenced by communication networks and different forms of power, which I think is really interesting, both hierarchical forms and non-hierarchical forms of power. So that'll be in our first reading, which is from the Systems View of Life from Fritjof Capra, again, the kind of the core text that we've been following. And then our second reading is from Starhawk, who probably needs no introduction in this group, but she goes into ideas of cooperation at a cellular to social level. She talks about this concept of social Gaianism as opposed to social Darwinism, which I was really intrigued by, just that flip of metaphor. And so we'll have a kind of a brief reading from her. And then the final reading, let me just get it, Sensuous Knowledge by Mina Salami. She is a new author for me. She's a Finnish Nigerian journalist who has written about African feminist issues, the African diaspora, and Nigerian women through her award-winning blog, Miss Afropolitan. So it's kind of, she has an interesting perspective, and what she talks about in the readings is she really takes a critical eye to our education systems and some of the biases embedded in education processes. So those are our readings tonight. A nice triage of different, or triad of different authors tonight. And I have a couple questions like usual. My first question was, or is, what roles do you think education institutions play in shaping society today? What roles could they play and how could they be improved? And then the second one, kind of thinking about power and non-hierarchical power, is how can we leverage social technologies to strengthen collective empowerment? Because the idea of empowerment comes up in our readings as a non-hierarchical form of power. So I will put those in the chat and pass it to Mr. Diego, who will start screen sharing with us.
Meaning, purpose, and human freedom. Having identified the organization of social systems as self-generating networks of communications, we now need to turn our attention to the structures that are produced by these networks and to the nature of the relationships that are engendered by them. A comparison with biological networks will again be useful. The metabolic network of a cell, for example, generates various molecular structures. Some of them become structural components of the network, forming parts of the cell membrane or of other cellular components. Others are exchanged between the network's nodes as carriers of energy or information or as catalysts of metabolic processes. Social networks, too, generate material structures, buildings, roads, technologies that become structural components of the network, and they also produce material goods and artifacts that are exchanged between the network's nodes. However, the production of material structures in social networks is quite different from that in biological and ecological networks. The structures are created for a purpose according to some design, and they embody some meaning. To understand the activities of social systems, it's therefore crucial to study them from that perspective. The perspective of meaning includes a multitude of interrelated characteristics that are essential to understanding social reality. Meaning itself is a systemic phenomenon. It always has to do with context. A general dictionary definition of meaning is an idea conveyed to the mind that requires or allows of interpretation, while interpretation may be defined as conceiving in the light of individual belief, judgment, or circumstance. In other words, we interpret something by putting it into a particular context of concepts, values, beliefs, or circumstances. To understand the meaning of anything, we need to relate it to other things in its environment, in its past, or in its future. Nothing is meaningful in itself.
For example, to understand the meaning of literary text, one needs to establish the multiple contexts of its words and phrases. This can be a purely intellectual endeavor, but it may also reach a deeper level. If the context of an idea or expression includes relationships involving our own selves, it becomes meaningful to us in a personal way. This deeper sense of meaning includes an emotional dimension and may even bypass reason altogether. Something may be profoundly meaningful to us through a direct experience of context. Meaning is essential to human beings. We continually need to make sense of our outer and inner worlds, find meaning in our environment and in our relationships with other human beings, and act according to that meaning. This includes, in particular, our need to act with a purpose or goal in mind. Because of our ability to project mental images into the future, we act with the conviction, valid or invalid, that our actions are voluntary, intentional, and purposeful. As human beings, we are capable of two kinds of actions. Like all living organisms, we engage in involuntary, unconscious activities, such as digesting our food or circulating our blood, which are part of the process of life and therefore cognitive in the sense of the Santiago theory of cognition. In addition, we engage in voluntary, intentional activities, and it is in acting with intention and purpose that we experience human freedom. As we mentioned in section 742, the systemic understanding of life sheds new light on the age-old philosophical debate about freedom and determinism. The key point is that the behavior of a living organism is constrained, but not determined, by outside forces. Living organisms are self-organizing, meaning that their behavior is not imposed by the environment, but is established by the system itself. More specifically, the organism's behavior is determined by its own structure, a structure formed by a succession of autonomous structural changes. The autonomy of living systems must not be confused with independence. Living organisms are not isolated from their environment. They interact with it continually, but the environment does not determine their organization. At the human level, we experience this self-determination as the freedom to act according to our own choices and decisions. To experience these as quote unquote our own means that they are determined by our nature, including our past experiences and genetic heritage. To the extent that we are not constrained by human relationships of power, our behavior is self-determined and therefore free.
The dynamics of culture. Our ability to hold mental images and project them into the future not only allows us to identify goals and purposes and develop strategies and designs, it also enables us to choose among several alternatives and hence to formulate values and social rules of behavior. All of these social phenomenon are generated by networks of communications as a consequence of the dual role of human communication. On one hand, the network continually generates mental images, thoughts, and meaning. On the other hand, it continually coordinates the behavior of its members. From the complex dynamics and interdependence of these processes emerges the integrated system of values, beliefs, and rules of conduct that we associate with the phenomenon of culture. The term culture has a long and intricate history and is now used in different intellectual disciplines with diverse and sometimes confusing meanings. In his classic text, Culture, historian Raymond Williams, 1981, traces the meaning of the word back to its early use as a noun denoting a process, the culture, i.e. cultivation.
I'm not really paying attention. Okay. Okay.
Or
bye.
Cindy, you got to mute yourself, darling. Thank you. Cultivation of crops, or the culture, i.e. rearing and breeding of animals. In the 16th century, this meaning was extended metaphorically to the active cultivation of the human mind. And in the late 18th century, when the word was borrowed from the French-German writers, who first spelled it Kultur, or subsequently Kultur, it acquired the meaning of a distinctive way of life of a people. In the 19th century, the plural cultures became especially important in the development of comparative anthropology, where it has continued to designate distinctive ways of life. In the meantime, the older use of culture as the active cultivation of the mind continued. Indeed, it expanded and diversified, covering a range of meanings from a developed state of mind, a cultured person, to the process of this development, cultural activities, to the means of these processes administered, for example, by a ministry of culture. In our time, the different meanings of culture that are associated with the active cultivation of the mind coexist, often uneasily, as Williams notes, with the anthropological use of a distinctive way of life of a people or social group, as in Aboriginal culture or corporate culture. In addition, the original biological meaning of culture as cultivation continues to be used as, for example, in agriculture, monoculture, or germ culture. For our systemic analysis of social reality, we need to focus on the anthropological meaning of culture, which the Columbia Encyclopedia defines as the integrated system of socially acquired values, beliefs, and rules of conduct that delimit the range of accepted behaviors in any given society. When we explore the details of this definition, we discover that culture arises from a complex, highly nonlinear dynamics. It is created by a social network involving multiple feedback loops through which values, beliefs, and rules of conduct are continually communicated, modified, and sustained. It emerges from a network of communications among individuals, and as it emerges, it produces constraints on their actions. In other words, the social structures or rules of behavior that constrain the actions of individuals are produced and continually reinforced by their own network of communications.
The social network also produces a shared body of knowledge, including information, ideas, and skills that shapes the culture's distinctive way of life in addition to its values and beliefs. Moreover, the culture's values and beliefs affect its body of knowledge. They are part of the lens through which we see the world. They help us to interpret our experiences and to decide what kind of knowledge is meaningful. This meaningful knowledge, continually modified by the network of communications, is passed on from generation to generation, together with the culture's values, beliefs, and rules of conduct. The system of shared values and beliefs creates an identity among the members of the social network, based on a sense of belonging. People in different cultures have different identities because they share different sets of values and beliefs. At the same time, an individual may belong to several different cultures. People's behavior is informed and restricted by their cultural identities, and this in turn reinforces their sense of belonging. Culture is embedded in people's way of life, and it tends to be so pervasive that it escapes our everyday awareness. Cultural identity also reinforces the closure of the network by creating a boundary of meaning and expectations that limits the access of people and information to the network. Thus, the social network is engaged in communications within a cultural boundary, which its members continually recreate and renegotiate. This situation is not unlike that of the metabolic network of a cell, which continually produces and recreates a boundary, the cell membrane, that confines it and gives it its identity. However, there are some crucial differences between cellular and social boundaries. Social boundaries, as we have emphasized, are not necessarily physical boundaries, but boundaries of meaning and expectations. They do not literally surround the network, but exist in a mental realm that does not have the topological properties of physical space. The similarities and differences between biological and social boundaries are a fascinating subject, which in our view deserves to be explored in much greater depth.
The origin of power. One of the most striking characteristics of social reality is the phenomenon of power. In the words of the economist John Kenneth Galbraith, 1984, the exercise of power, the submission of some to the will of others, is inevitable in modern society. Nothing whatever is accomplished without it. Power can be socially malign. It is also socially essential. The essential role of power in social organization is linked to inevitable conflicts of interest. Because of our ability to affirm preferences and make choices accordingly, conflicts of interest will appear in any human community, and power is the means by which these conflicts are resolved. This does not necessarily imply the threat or use of violence. In his lucid book, Galbraith distinguishes three kinds of power, depending on the means that are employed. Coercive power wins submission by inflicting or threatening sanctions. Compensatory power by offering incentives or rewards. And conditioned power by changing beliefs through persuasion or education. To find the right mixture of these three kinds of power in order to resolve conflicts and balance competing interests is the art of politics.
The association of power with the advancement of one's own interests is the basis of most contemporary analysis of power. In the words of Galbraith, quoted in Luke's, individuals and groups seek power to advance their own interests and to extend to others their personal, religious, or social values. This is when power becomes linked to exploitation. A further stage is reached when power is pursued not only to advance one's own personal interest, values, or social perceptions, but also for its own sake. It's well known for most people that the exercise of power brings high emotional and material rewards, conveyed by elaborate symbols and rituals of obedience, from standing ovations, fanfares, and military salutes to office suites, limousines, corporate jets, and motorcades. As the community grows and increases in complexity, its positions of power will also increase. In complex societies, resolutions of conflicts and decisions about how to act will be effective only if authority and power are organized within administrative structures. In the long history of human civilization, numerous forms of social organization have been generated by this need to organize the distribution of power. Thus, power plays a central role in the emergence of social structures. In social theory, all rules of conduct are included in the concept of social structures, whether they're informal, resulting from a continual coordination of behavior, or formalized, documented, and enforced by laws. All such formal structures or social institutions are ultimately rules of behavior that facilitate decision-making and embody relationships of power. This crucial link between power and social structure has been discussed extensively in the classic texts of power. The sociologist and economist Max Weber states, domination has played the decisive role in the economically most social structures of the past and present. And according to the political theorist Hannah Arendt, all political institutions are manifestations and materials of power, both quoted respectively in Luke's. Power in social networks. In recent years, social networks have become a major focus of attention, not only in science, but also in society at large and throughout the newly emerging global culture. Social networks have existed in all human communities throughout history, but the recent information technology revolution has given them unprecedented flexibility and global scale, and has made them the dominant culture of our age. According to the sociologist Manuel Castells, society in the early 21st century is characterized by social structure that he calls this network society. In this network society, the nature of power in the social network is an important and intriguing issue, both from a theoretical and from a practical point of view. It is explored in considerable detail by Castells in a book titled Communication Power. Castells distinguishes both several distinct kinds of power in social networks. He argues that the paramount form of power in the network society is the power to constitute networks, to connect individuals and institutions to these networks, or to exclude them, and to interconnect different networks. A detailed discussion of Castells' analysis is beyond the scope of this book. However, we want to add a general comment about power in networks. In addition to power as domination of others, which arises from conflicts of interest, as we have seen, there is another kind of power. Power as empowerment of others, whereas power as domination is most effectively exercised through hierarchy. The most effective social structure for power as empowerment is the network. In a social network, people are empowered by being connected to the network. In such a network, the success of the whole community depends on the success of the individual members, while the success of each member depends on the success of the community as a whole. Any enrichment of individuals due to increased connectedness in the network will therefore also enrich the entire network. In social networks, the hubs with the richest connection become the centers of power. Because they connect large numbers of people to the network, they are sought out as authorities in various fields. Thus, in a social network, the centers of power are centers of both empowerment and authority.
Diego, is that the last page of our reading?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I believe.
Okay, so I
that's
can move on to the next one.
Yeah, where we stop with this one, yeah. And with this one, we'll start at Genesis.
You might need to make that a little bigger for some people. That's better. Oh, wow. Big boom.
Genesis, before the beginning. In a swirling spiral of gas, heat, and light, a tiny grain of dust that was Gaia's seed danced and swirled. Throbbing and pulsing with an electric passion, she drew on her other grains, other seeds, until together they formed a ball, spinning and dancing in the lens of radiance that was to become the sun. The dancers flung out their arms, swirled their skirts, bumped up against each other, and fused. Growing larger and larger, spinning and dancing faster and faster, they were drawn toward each other by a passionate pull of gravity. at times colliding in a fiery death, and at other times in a mating union, until at last the planets congealed into their orbits, circling a fiery sun. Gaia was hot, her surface erupting in plumes and rivers of fire, her face bombarded by missiles of rock that left her pockmarked with craters and seeded with ice and chemical prototypes of life. Slowly, slowly, she cooled down. On her surface, packets of energy, frozen into form, combined and recombined. Ice melted to primordial seas that washed a rocky shore. Lightning struck. Waves rolled to shore and retreated. The soup of energy was boiled and cooled, dried and immersed again and again. Bubbles formed thin skins that enclosed crystalline strands of frozen energy, organized in a radically new way, a way that conveyed information, that communicated instructions for reproducing itself. The double helix of DNA was life's first great creative leap, the one that allowed all others to follow. Life was born.
The gift of the ancestors. Life on Earth was still relatively new. At first, simple wonderful beings. Beep. A little bigger, please. Filled the seas, living by changing the energy patterns around them, breaking down large molecules, complex clumps of dancing energy and form into smaller clumps, using the energy release to move and dance. They filled the seas in promiscuous abundance, constantly engaging bits of DNA, sidling up to one another and crooning the bacterial equivalent of, hey, 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 baby, the thought of trading genes with you drives me crazy. They formed one life whole, one global gene pool, one planetary well of information and experimentation. But after a time, life reached a crisis point. Life began to run out of food. There weren't enough of those complex molecules of all of life to continue, and life began to starve and die. Yet life has always been inventive, creative. Those simple one-celled beings were already experimenting with different forms. Some were long and skinny and wriggled, and some were round and fat. Some adapted to hot and some to cold. And always they were trading genes, shifting forms, changing and transforming. At that time, there wasn't yet a brain on the planet. Yet life came up with something so brilliant, so amazing, that it transformed the whole nature of existence and the atmosphere itself. Life invented a mandala, a beautiful molecule like a patterned flower, like a magical quality, with a magical quality. For when a photon of sunlight struck the heart of this pattern, it began to vibrate and shiver and set off a chain of reactions that harvested the sun's energy to turn carbon dioxide and water into food. Chlorophyll and the process of photosynthesis were life's next great invention, and the green things, the sunlight harvesters, were born.
Green things filled the seas and the crevices of the shores, flung a smear of filmy life over rocks and sand. Life flourished as never before, but there was one problem. The miraculous process to use sunlight to make food gave off a waste product, a toxic gas that burned and destroyed everything it touched. And as life grew over hundreds of millions, a billion, then 2 billion years, the very air became polluted by this gas, so that life could no longer avoid its touch of death. But life continued to experiment and invent. Some of those tiny creatures dug down in the mud to avoid the toxic gas. Some clumped together for protection, and some discovered another miracle. that by reversing one of the moves in the dance of photosynthesis, a new process could be born, one that could take the toxic gas, which we call oxygen, and use it to burn food and make energy. And so the breathers were born, those who dine on the sunlight harvesters, burning their bodies as fuel for life. In burning food, the breathers gave off carbon dioxide, which the green things, with the help of the sun, transformed to food again. And the green things give off oxygen, which the breathers use in burning food. Gaia began to breathe, passing her breath back and forth from red to green, continuing to build up oxygen to transform herself. And after millions of years, the breathers took the mandala of chlorophyll, switched the atom at its heart to iron, and formed the hemoglobin that swims in the cells of our red blood. And the cycle is complete, and the earth breathes in and out, red to green to red. And this air we breathe is a gift of the early ancestors. With each breath in, we take in the results of their great creativity. With each breath, we give back. And the balance is so perfectly kept that oxygen remains at just the right amount to sustain life. For if there were only a few more percentage points of oxygen in the air, any spark would light a fire that would ignite the whole atmosphere. And if there were only a few percentage points less, no fire would ever burn and could not live.
Cooperation and complexity. Breathers added something new to life. Breathers added something new to life's dance. The sunlight harvesters floated in a womb-like sea that contained the elements they needed to make food. The energy they needed showered down from the sun. Life was easy, and they could simply be and receive. But breathers needed to find food from the dead bodies of the sunlight harvesters or from the living ones. They had to be more mobile, more aggressive, pursuing and engulfing and penetrating before they could digest and dissolve their prey. Every now and then, an aggressive breather penetrated a life form that did not dissolve, or took in someone it could not digest, and instead of eating each other, the life forms coalesced and supported each other. A breather might make food more efficiently for a scavenging bacterium. A sunlight harvester and a breather might team up to make best use of all possible sources of energy. A long, skinny, wriggling creature might bury its head in this new, larger cell and provide mobility in exchange for food. 100, 1,000 tiny creatures might team up to become one larger being, pooling their crystalline DNA library of instructions into one central core. And a new life form was born, still single-celled, but 1,000 times larger than what had gone before and far more complex. The eukaryotes were born, the cells with a nucleus that are the ancestors of all larger creatures. This new collective form opened up a wide realm of possibilities for life. For 2 billion years, simple bacteria had been the only model of life. Now life began to experiment and change. One of the first experiments was sex. bacteria invented a simple form of sex, trading genes like bits of gossip throughout a worldwide pool. The variations created by this process allow them to change and evolve. When they reproduce, however, the process is still simple. Each cell simply replicates itself and buds off an identical copy. The eukaryotes each had a center, a nucleus that held a library of genetic information arranged in paired chromosomes of DNA. Now they learn to divide those pairs, to split the deck before reshuffling, and each half set of genes could combine with the half set from a different individual. Sexual reproduction was born and became very popular. These new cells began to build on their cooperation to form colonies. Some learned to take minerals from seawater and spin elaborate spheres of intricate crystalline forms. Some pioneered the branching patterns of roots, the flat planes of leaves. Some built the first true bodies made of many cells, linked by the communication tubes of nerves. And 580 million years ago, life exploded in variety. Life grew legs and began to walk on the seafloor and the shoreline. Life spun shells in elaborate, ornate forms, tried out tails, fins, flippers, segments, carapaces, and antennae. And this burgeoning life grew weirder, more delightful, and more strange than all succeeding life put together, until disaster hit. A meteor hit, or massive volcanoes belched smoke into the air, covering the earth with a blanket of cloud that first blocked the sun, then warmed the atmosphere. Something changed the earth's climate, and in a great extinction, 90% of life on earth died. What survived was not as diverse, not as inventive, but life tried out many variations on a few basic patterns, and again began to grow and evolve. The seas were filled and the land was colonized. Dinosaurs roamed great forests of ferns, and winged lizards soared through the skies.
Then, some vast time later, another meteor crashed into the earth, leaving a greater crater 100 miles wide, and the dinosaurs died. Their small descendants, lizards and birds, still prowl and soar. A small, humble, shrew-like mammal that survived the catalysm gave rise to mice and deer, tiger and mammoth, bison, horse, ape, and us. And here we are, with our thumbs and our big brains, inventive, creative, aggressive, aware in some ways, oblivious in others, still struggling to learn the lessons of our ancestors bequeathed us. That everything changes, that everything is interdependent, that we survive by cooperating, sharing resources, pooling information, that we can come suddenly, cataclysmically, and when it does, the small are better to fit to survive than the large. That when faced with great crises, life is capable of great invention. That we are no less creative than the crystals that invented DNA, no less artists than the bacteria that shaped chlorophyll. This is the story I like to remember when the world seems bleak and I wonder how we will ever survive. Or when I feel as if the goddess and all the powers of hope have deserted us. At those times, I remember that life, by its very nature, is a great power of creativity and transformation, a power that will prevail. And when I doubt, all I need to do is to take a breath in and out and receive the gift of the ancestors.
Lessons of evolution. What does this story teach us? The first lesson is that the universe is amazingly creative, responsive, and ever-changing. The second lesson is that survival goes not to the most ruthless or competitive, but to those who most effectively cooperate, communicate, and share resources. The cells of our body are collectives. The atmosphere we breathe is a collaborative endeavor. Adaptation is not about one species triumphing over another, but about a whole system co-evolving. Competition and predation are important aspects of this system, but they are not the only driving force. Cooperation and competition exist in a dance, a yin and yang, harmonic balance of variation and culling, combining and editing. The third lesson of importance is the importance of variation, one of Darwin's insights. Life does not evolve one best type, but a multiplicity of fit types that retain a variety of forms and potentials. This variation, along with the random mutation of genes, allows for more diversity and more resilience in the face of environmental changes. A disease that fells one member of a species, for example, may not prove lethal to another. When a new potential food source appears, individuals who share a particular variation may be better suited than others to make use of it. Variation is every species' hidden treasure and insurance policy. And that is one reason why loss of biodiversity and variation within a species causes environmentalists such grave concern. The fourth lesson is that change is not just a gradual process, but maybe a punctuated equilibrium, involving periods of relative stasis punctuated by crisis. The river of change generally flows gradually downhill along the gentle slopes of slow incremental change, but it may also plunge suddenly over a waterfall. Both forms of change occur in evolution and in life. When we look at potential environmental changes ahead, we do not know if we will see slow variations that our society and the biological community can adapt to, or sudden crashes down a rocky drop-off that will happen so abruptly that we cannot turn aside or cushion the fall. If we were to extrapolate these lessons to human society, they might lead to a set of values we could call social Gaianism, as opposed to social Darwinism. Social Gaianism would acknowledge individual needs and self-interest, but see them best served in systems of cooperation and mutual aid. Our representatives in Congress might invoke the lessons of social Gaianism to bolster public support for social programs, childcare, education, healthcare, and other means of sharing resources and support. We would understand that the system is only healthy as its weakest member. Libraries, those repositories of knowledge and inherent instructions, would be sacred. Knowing our interdependence with nature and knowing also that a stressed system can suddenly crash, we would move swiftly and decisively to shift to renewable sources of energy, to phase out fossil fuels, and to keep chemicals out of our living and life-created atmosphere. When international conflicts arose, we would identify our security and survival with our ability to negotiate and cooperate, not conquer. The Gaian story of evolution shifts our focus when we look at nature. We open our eyes and look beyond each individual tree to the pattern of the whole. We honor the unseen creatures below and above, as well as what we can see. We begin to look for patterns and relationships, not just isolated individuals. We know that diverse, resilient, complex systems are most likely to survive. And only what's good for the biosphere is truly good for the USA. This story also gives us hope. Enormous creativity is embedded in our very cells. Resilience is the nature of living beings. We, with our complex brains, have the inherent ability to evolve in ways that can nurture and sustain the life patterns that surround us. And if we don't use that ability wisely, there are those gene-swapping bacteria to sip the cocktails of our wastes, and in another billion years or so, come up again with something new. So that's where we end with Starhawk. And we're going to take a little intermission, a Diego intermission, and just review. Yeah, I know. It's good to take intermissions because this is a lot. And these are going a little long tonight. I'll definitely be careful to time them more carefully. But anyway, Diego was going to share just a little bit overview about Gaian theory and this concept of social Gaianism, and just unpacking that a little bit from Diego's point of view.
Yeah, I can talk about it. And then I thought maybe if we have enough time, I'd like to hear what other people have to say about this too, because I think it's something that has a lot of room for interpretation, both in how the, Gaia hypothesis is structured to begin with, and then also, how it's applied to social systems. Initially, at the most basic level, the Gaia hypothesis is just this idea that the Earth behaves as a self-regulating system, an organism, if you will, like all of the processes, all of the biosphere, the atmosphere, the geological basis of all that are linked together and are influenced by each other in their regulatory and metabolic processes. There's also sort of the interpretation that these systems are sort of directing their regulation or their self-regulation towards increased complexity, towards maintaining a habitable set of conditions for life on Earth, and for it to continue diversifying. I think that for me is where there's room for interpretation as to whether they're so clear, like a kind of a telos or a purpose to the direction of the regulation that the Earth system goes through. You see aspects of both increasing and growing complexity, and then a whole big collapse of certain structures and systems. So you have kind of what could be a more complex situation than just a simple drive towards increased complexity. But beyond that sort of added layer of driven self-regulation, there's the basis for it, which is that the system itself, whether it's regulated in one direction or not, whatever it does, it's constituted of this whole intermeshed collection of different structures, different actors made up of different structures, different systems within itself. And that's what I think is useful for like looking at the social stuff. You have the same thing going on where our social systems are behaving like any other complex material system, and by material I mean that to include acting agents, life forms, organisms, people, anything, that there's a lot of different ways, like just how, the symbiogenesis, the idea of like the mitochondria being trapped inside the larger cell, but still producing a cooperative benefit. There's parasitism. There's all sorts of different kinds of interactions between organisms in a system that you can find reflected in social systems. And so, to identify that the system is the structure of how it works lets you sort of understand those things better. And I don't think it's so clear as to say that if life works a certain way, or if this process operates in a certain way at a certain level, then it can be mapped directly onto a larger system. I think the benefit of understanding the complexity of systems is that the dynamics aren't reproduced, exactly the same at every level. There's nonlinear interactions. There's a lot of room for complexity. But overall, there's the current social systems that we're saddled with are not geared towards sharing resources, towards interdependence, towards within human communities, let alone human and non-human communities. So I think there's definitely a huge need, and it's kind of a little disheartening to me to read this from however long ago it was and see that there's so much optimism for just right away adopting this set of values and switching to renewable energy and switching to the most beneficial social organizations for the biosphere. But yeah, that's what I think. If anyone else wants to chime in, please do.
I'm sorry, what year was this published, the Starhawk piece?
I don't know. Kelly, do you know?
I will find out right now, actually.
Because the original Gaia hypothesis was in the 70s, right? In the 1970s.
Yeah, and it's evolved over time, I know, towards more complex than just thinking of the Earth as an organism, but it's 2004, Starhawk.
I just think your text, the Fritjof Capra text on the systems view of life, is just like the Gaia hypothesis on a much more thoroughly, deeply examined and nuanced iteration, and seems just much more evolved as a theory. And as far as, yeah, I better not comment on social Gaiaism because I think it's odd. It seems oddly theoretical and idealized.
I think I feel similarly to you, Ansu, about that.
Ansu, when you say you better not comment on something, why would you self-edit? I'm just curious.
Okay, here we go. No, so astute, Lauren, really. Well, I don't know the whole text. I don't know the context. I don't know the whole, book. This is the first time I'm hearing it, but it did sound just like a fantasy a little bit, because it just wasn't grounded in even 20th century realities of the cataclysmic, atomic bomb era and all of that. So it seemed a little dissociated from reality, was my impression, is what I said that. yeah, that was a little tongue in cheek.
Thank you. No, that makes a lot of sense.
At the risk of being too scathing to this to this reading, I think that there's truth to that. I mean, the sentence about like Congress adopting social Gaianism and the sort of, it like leaves a lot of the structures that are just absolutely directly tied to, you know, exploitative, extractive processes, and sort of hopes that they will take it upon themselves to relinquish that power by exposing them to something that at this point they have been exposed to. They have been they have already decided to sort of bypass or get on without, you know, holding as a central value. And by their very existence in the first place, you know, could not ever possibly make themselves reconcile with this new set of values.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say I know about Starhawk's writing is that one of the things that she intentionally sets out to do is imagine in detail alternative paths for society and speak them out loud, and even has creative visualizations. And in some ways, it can seem idealistic and utopian for sure. But I think that there's room for proposing alternatives. And I don't think we dove deep enough in her book to really know how she kind of got to that point of talking about social Gaianism. But I totally agree that, you know, it's also, I mean, social Darwinism is such a loaded thing. And so then just switching that over to social Gaianism, it feels a little bit uncomfortable to me too, but it definitely stood out to me, like, as, okay, where is she going with this, and what other constructs and ways of being does that imply? And, you know, trying to go deeper into what she's implying there was an interest of mine. But I agree that, and other people have said this about Starhawk too, like the little utopian.
So Kelly, I'm wondering when, you know, when Newton talks about flipping the metaphor and using language to flip the metaphors that we live by, when you said, you know, the whole idea of social Darwinism is so problematic. And so it's almost like the opposite would be to say social Gaianism. And so I'm wondering whether you think the author is conscious of the idea of the metaphor she's using to define her position as not that, rather than offer necessarily a roadmap to the future, but it's saying whatever it is, it's going to be based on a consideration for what we call Gaia, needs to be considered rather than what we call Darwin or Darwinism. Would you say that's part of it?
I definitely think she's using a charge of social Darwinism and the kind of how it's a known metaphor for our social structures, and trying to flip that metaphor intentionally, for sure. Has all those connotations, like you said, but yeah, I mean, I can see why it would bring up reservations too, because of partially because of those connections to that original metaphor in a way too. So.
Yeah, Lauren, I definitely think there's power in flipping the metaphor like that, and thinking of it as saying not that rather than exactly this.
Yeah.
I mean, at the same time, I think she perpetuates that, because her whole proposal is a kind of affectation of innocence. Like, you can just, you know, spout an idea without the context. You know, if you were an Indigenous person reading this, all of a sudden you'd be like, wow, she's talking about our way of life as if it was just magically produced by her own brain. So she's kind of erased this existing model of being, and instead she's proposing it as an idea as well. It would be kind of insulting to people to say, oh, it's possible to just, have this equitable sharing when they've been oppressed by the very system that produced her. So it's a little affectation of innocence as well, which is not so innocent.
Yeah, I felt that come through with the use of the term cooperation. I felt like that was a strange term to use because when we think about cooperation, that usually, for me at least, it gives off the air of some kind of like submitting yourself to something, which then creates this like idea of like submitting yourself to like some kind of power as opposed to just like working together and collaboratively, which made me think about like when the power structures are off to begin with, when you say that you're cooperating, what is it that you're cooperating with? And is cooperation actually just like a word to cover up a different type of coercion or a coercive struggle?
Yeah, it's at once too utopian and at the same time not utopian enough in that it's like preserving the international conflicts, the U.S. Congress, the whole infrastructure of the settler state that is at its core like irreversibly tied up with what it's this new idea is positioning itself as like as being against.
Right. Yep.
I have.
Go ahead, Lauren.
No, well, I was going to take it sideways, but so I'll go after you, Diego.
I'm just reiterating what Ansu said, which is that this information has been here for so long. This people have known this. People have said this, and so many people have lived this in so many different like ways and ways of being that at this point there's no need for reinventing and slapping a term and saying that this is it, when what you really need to do in both the ideological or ideal sense and the sense of actual situational relationships of power is listen to what indigenous people have been saying, listen to what the people who have been living in ways that are not industrial capitalism have been doing and saying.
Ready for my lateral path? My lateral path has to do with deep time. And I think that she does a very convincing job of describing deep time in relationship to the process of becoming and emerging, which I think is a really difficult thing to do and runs into real complexity when you add the term social in front of anything that is going to include metabolic processes. So I think her description of, moving from a period of almost cyanobacteria-like structures that are eating light and giving off oxygen through to big questions about, our species being expelled from the earth, and deep time in the future, something will emerge that is novel as a result of it. I think these ideas about deep time are really complex, and I think that she does a really good job of making that spectrum of time stand out in relationship to social time and political time, and that's something that I think is a good start about thinking about social systems that can model biological systems.
I agree about that, Lauren. I loved her description of the primordial soup and then the emerging evolutionary story. But the conclusion of that story, or the point that she draws out of it, should be that we shouldn't think of ourselves as separate from that, that we too will, you know, continue to change and metabolize with our environment in exchange with the elements. From, I don't know how we got from there to cooperation. That's where you lost me, I think.
I really enjoyed both of these readings. Thank you. I'm not a scientist, so I can't really comment critically on it in a sense, but I really enjoyed the poetry of the language of the second one very much. And I'm perhaps utopian, so I liked this storytelling of evolution in a sense, and I really like the term breathers. What was the other one? Sunlight catchers or something like that? That was very nice.
They always fast forward through the dinosaurs in these long accounts of deep time.
Yeah.
Was that up you, Diego?
Yeah, it's like the only important thing that dinosaurs ever did was, stomp around and sit in their palm tree ferns.
She did say they like fly through the air, which she made a nod to the beauty of the birds that came from it.
It is noticeable that most stories about dinosaurs ends with them being extinguished, though.
Yeah, there's a lot more recent ones that end with birds. Like that's the new thing. Is instead of ending it with the big volcano and the asteroid, they show the bird at the end of the documentary or at the end of the fossil hall or something. Anyway, that's a tangent.
Could I, as a novice, have a definition of deep time, please?
Well, I can tell you a definition that's been helpful to me, and it comes from an author of a book called The Annals of the Former World, whose last name is McPhee. And he talks about the struggle that he has as a writer whose major is English, and he's writing about geology to kind of try and build a bridge with language to geological time versus the experience of human cultural time. So he says that most human beings, if not all, and he questions whether it's even in our DNA, have the ability to comprehend 2 generations before us and 2 generations after, or roughly 5 generations. So, and yet he says, he models the idea of geological time by sort of saying, if you take a look at your hand and you look at the lifeline and you imagine that the lifeline is the period of time where every creature that's alive on planet Earth is a single cell organism. And he kind of goes through that to finally you get to the nail of your pinky finger. And on the nail of your pinky finger, at the very top edge, you have the birth of mankind on the planet. our time period on planet Earth is so short compared to deep time that it takes to understand geology, that there's almost a completely different conversation for geologists that he's talked to about deep time and human time. And there's very few that find that they can talk about both in the same kind of conversation. So deep time, my understanding of deep time and what the way I'm using it here is referring to the story of life on Earth rather than the story of people on Earth.
Okay. Thank you.
Lauren, I would, you made me think of an exhibit I saw at the Natural History Museum that put exactly that analogy, like compare human time to, you know, evolutionary time and the beginning of the Earth. But then it reminded me of that first reading in the sense that our culture produces these exhibits like at the Natural History Museum, which culminates in the upright bipedal man. That is it. So we have this image in our head.
Progress.
We've achieved it, you know. Give me the medal. Which is really damaging. It should be like whatever happens to, you know, 2 generations from us, but also 1,000 years down or 10,000 years.
Totally. That's so interesting, Sue. Well, it's already 7 o'clock, and we didn't get to our third reading, which I actually think you guys would really like.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I mean, for people that can stay.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Keep going. It's probably only 15 minutes or so for this one.
Yeah, luckily, we don't. Zoom is, you know, free airspace, so sort of.
Yeah.
As long as it's before 7:30, I can stay. And share
Okay.
screen.
We'll definitely be done with the reading before 7:30. We might discuss it beyond, but the reading should only be about 15 minutes, and I think it's a little bit more modern and in tune with some of newer thinking. So anyway, let's do it. And we're going to start at where the stars are in the best-selling book.
Okay, I'll read. In the best-selling book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Nobel Prize-winning neuropsychologist Daniel Kahneman, the author makes an argument similar to the ancient Yoruba philosophy of Ogbon. Kahneman argues that we make decisions with the aid of 2 internal systems, which he calls System 1 and System 2. System 1 is an emotional, intuitive system that has little understanding of logic and statistics, while System 2 is a reflective, deductive system that is capable of reasoning. You should say that System 1 is comparable to Obon Inu, knowledge of the gut, while System 2 is comparable to Ogbon Ori, knowledge of the head. There is a crucial difference, however, in the typical binary way of Euro-patriarchal knowledge. If the names System 1 and System 2 don't already speak volumes, Kahneman sees the 2 systems as involved in a psychodrama with 2 characters, with the emotional System 1 being the less intelligent character than the logical System 2. In contrast, you could say that the Yoruba mythological theory of knowledge sees the 2 systems in a passionate love story with 2 enamored characters instead. I'm not presumptuous enough to dismiss the scientific research of the Nobel Prize-winning neuropsychologist, especially as I am not an expert on dual process theory, DPT, the psychological field of which Kahneman's System 1 and 2 are an example. In fact, experts in the DPT field challenge thinking. For example, in the provocative book titled The Enigma of Reason, A New Theory of Human Understanding, where researchers Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber argue that the intellectual capacity to reason is itself an intuition, an emotional function. They argue that intuition, like reason, plays a huge role in our ability to make sense of our environment. The renowned neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has also put forward the idea that rather than being obstructed by emotion, as is usually assumed, reason is directed by it. According to Damasio's somatic marker hypotheses, emotional experiences or somatic markers override reason when we make decisions. In short, our emotional response to a situation is the basis for our rational choice. There are many other important, if conflicting, theories about the fundamental question in consciousness studies known as the mind-body problem. Epiphenomenalism posits that there is no such thing as the mind at all, that there is just a body reacting to life. Pantheism, at the other end of the spectrum, argues that the mind is a collective project of sorts, where everyone is impacted by everyone else's thoughts and actions. As Baruch Spinoza, who is credited with formulating pantheism, said in Proposition 7, the order and connection of the thought is identical to the order and connection of things. But nobody has provided a satisfactory solution to what David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness, which simply put is the question of why humans have feelings. Perhaps considering that we are only using half of our knowledge, Ogbon Ori, it's no surprise that this remains a hard problem.
The truly hard problem is that the fragmented knowledge system in use today is unable to deal with the real issues confronting humanity because it neglects the experienced side of reality. Our educational systems are stale. They teach us how to transform the brain, but not the psyche. They explain how to design evolved societies, but not how to evolve citizens of them. Not how to be evolved citizens of them. They claim that emotions, central as they are to life, are incapable of explaining existence. And so, despite living in the information age with an abundance of insight, we are incapable of solving pressing problems such as social injustice, sexism, racism, classism, speciesism, climate change, poverty, restlessness, mental health issues, and loneliness. Regardless of how educated or developed a society is, these same problems are causing despair and division everywhere. So we must concede that we are either approaching the wrong problems or we are approaching the problems wrongly. My stance is the latter. There is no soul to knowledge production. The rigid, rule-bound, robotic way that dominates how we view knowledge today is what I refer to as Euro-patriarchal knowledge, a hierarchy fixated construct of knowledge that was initiated by elite European men as propaganda to solidify their worldviews on a massive scale. The word propaganda comes from to propagate, which originally referred to the ability of plants to breed and multiply from one generation to another. It is etymologically apt, for the ability to adapt from generation to generation is precisely the magnificence of Euro-patriarchal knowledge, the narrative that centers assessment and quantification as the epitome of knowledge, of knowing, and that positions the European phenotype and male genotype as particularly gifted in the production of said knowledge.
Euro-patriarchal knowledge has its roots in the Age of Discovery. It was during this period in history that European monarchs first sent explorers on voyages and expansions to world regions thought of as the unknown. They were motivated by an adage: knowledge is power. It was the same saying that Black progressives would later use as a slogan to end deception. However, whereas civil rights activists meant that knowledge is the power to determine their destiny and identity, as Ebony magazine published in a 1969 special edition titled The Black Revolution, the 17th century British philosopher Francis Bacon, who coined the adage, meant it literally. Knowledge was a tool of control. It was man's God-given right to know and shape nature to his intents and purposes. Bacon's Novum Organon in 1620 helped to shift the general attitude in Europe away from the idea that knowledge was something to preserve, as it had been in medieval times, to the idea that knowledge was something to acquire, as it became in the modern world. It is typically Bacon's method of induction that is seen as a forerunner to the paradigm of knowledge we adhere to today, but I would argue that his contribution to perceiving knowledge as something we are in a race to acquire is just as crucial. To acquire means to gain possession of, and this precisely is how we approach knowledge, as a quantifiable thing to be controlled and possessed in vast quantities at all costs. Our politics, economics, law, media, education, and policy are all formed around the fundamental position at the heart of Euro-patriarchal knowledge, namely, that the purpose of amassing knowledge is ultimately to rank, compete, and dominate. I use the phrase Euro-patriarchal knowledge rather than, say, empire, superpower, or white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, as the Black feminist scholar Bell Hooks astutely calls the system we live in, because in this book, we are reimagining the narrative behind knowledge production, the framing story or the meta-narrative, rather than the structure it produces. The two are, of course, closely tied. The structural and political systems of white supremacy, capitalism, neoliberalism, and imperialism are the raison something in French of Euro-patriarchal knowledge. The point of labeling it this way is, however, to distinguish the narrative from the structures that it creates so that we can, hopefully, explore if a different narrative would consequently produce a different structure. Basically, to change the structure, we first need to change the story about the structure.
It is possible. The Me Too movement, for example, has fundamentally changed the story of how we speak about sexual assault in the mainstream. It shifted the narrative from silence to voice and from shame to blame. This in return changes structures in both the personal and political spheres by engaging an emphasis on consent and the criminalization of sexual abuse. There is a similar need to change the story in all oppressive social, economic, and political contexts. Also, while there's nothing positive to say about the structures of white supremacy, imperialism, elitism, and patriarchy, the narrative that produces Euro-patriarchal knowledge is not altogether negative. The scientific, industrial, and information revolutions would not have taken place without a competitive race to acquire knowledge. In the absence of these revolutions, there would have been no problematic Enlightenment movement, and in turn, no encyclopedias, maps, trains, planes, modern universities, and many other institutions that in their own way enhance our collective experience. Euro-patriarchal knowledge has resulted in significant achievements, not least in the much cherished development of rational thinking and reason. Rationality and reason are phenomena that we indeed should guard. To make it very clear, the point of sensuous knowledge is not to abandon induction or impartial judgment. However, ironically, Euro-patriarchal knowledge itself is not rooted in the rational objectivity it promotes. It is a constructed and biased narrative that brazenly centers whiteness and maleness. It is a narrative that parades propaganda as knowledge. It helps accumulate insight on how to end war, poverty, and disease, yet doesn't end them. Instead of producing thriving, exciting, and wise societies as knowledge should do, Euro-patriarchal knowledge creates a world of social, political, psychological, and spiritual suffering. This is no accident. As soon as there are social problems to solve, then more technical knowledge needs to be acquired. Data, studies, surveys, analysis, expert panels, trades, journals, and you name it. The more resources that need to be pumped into technical knowledge, the stronger the idea that knowledge is technical. No matter all the erudition, Europatrical knowledge will never come to grips with the problem of human suffering, because ending human suffering would mean ending its rule. The algorithm is clear. So long as Europatrical knowledge is the input, the output will favor the same pattern of thought. The only way to change the course of humanity is to change the input, to reimagine the way we think of knowledge with an altogether different corrective story, a tabula rasa. When you change the dominant narrative, everything changes along with it. That's exactly why there's so much propaganda to uphold. Defeating Europatrical knowledge is therefore a challenging process. It involves a completely new way of thinking and being in the world. It means seeing knowledge not as static, but as a creative project, something that grows in advance, a human activity and artwork. But that's precisely what makes it worthwhile.
And I actually think that's where we end with this reading. Right, Diego, there's no more pages. Yeah, that was the end of that one.
Yeah, that's it.
They're quite different and intense in their own ways, aren't they? These three readings. Yeah, it's interesting to bring them together. I didn't choose these, by the way. It sounds like I did, but we had another contributor, and it's interesting for me to explore them in relation to each other as well and find how they connect. But yeah, that's it. So we can open it up for discussion, and I can put my questions around. Now I feel like they're outdated after our earlier discussion, but mostly just talking about, educational institutions. This author has some pretty intense things to say about our forms of knowledge. It's interesting how she qualifies later that, not all of the production from this knowledge is negative, but the framing story itself seems to perpetuate problematic structures in our society, which is interesting. But the questions I had, and I know we're running out of time, and Diego, if you need to drop off, feel free, and anybody else, but
I have until 7:30.
Cool. Yeah, just thinking about educational institutions and how they could be improved, what roles they currently play. And then I got interested from the very first reading, which seems like a long time ago, just to think about what are social technologies, how they might strengthen this kind of idea of a networked kind of power versus a centralized power. And those were kind of the
Well, one thing that I thought of in the reading, and it was the only I really agreed with the conclusions of the reading. Like I'm right with it, but there's one part that I don't know, it just seemed a little bit odd to me to identify like airplanes and airplanes is enough, but like trains, all this other stuff, like plenty of the things that are not exclusively like life-saving or absolutely essential technologies that are responsible for so much of the everything that's wrong with anything, that to just identify that as like the but it's not all bad just kind of stuck out to me. But again, what do I know? I'm sitting here, having been on planes and ridden on trains before and reading encyclopedias. But yeah.
Diego, I think you'd think differently about it if she mentioned the word anesthetic or painkiller.
Yeah, that's what I meant, like life-saving technologies, like that kind of thing. and if like, I don't even mean to say that, for example, airplanes, you know, we have to do without them, nobody should use them, whatever. Like, it's just that if we're gonna say that we're gonna hold on to that as a you know, a part of our collective lives, then we have to reconcile with what that means. You can't have an airplane without a factory. You can't have a factory without 15 hillsides that are having metal ripped out of them and habitat taken away from species. You can't, you just can't. So we have that has to be reconciled. Like, I don't know if that's the most important thing to be taking away from the reading, but it's just what I thought of.
Well, I think there's also the question of bringing a different kind of judiciousness to the use of the rational brain and the science and the technology that ensues from that. Because, you know, you could also argue, well, it would be a good idea to use the power of the, you know, breaking the atomic electron bond and to use it for, I don't know, a power generation versus a bomb, you know. That is one of the arguments.
Yeah.
To address the question that Kelly posed in the chat, and kind of speaking to what you're saying, Diego, with the association between like tracing from a train to like ultimately it traces back to capital and the flow of capital and capitalism. And with the question of what roles do you think education institutions play in shaping society today? What roles could they play and how could they be improved? I think insofar as they're an institution, it will only contribute to the harm of society. And I say that as someone who intends to go to grad school. So whatever, like.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
yeah.
I could not agree more. Like, also being someone who intends to go to grad school, like, you know, you can be studying the most social Guyanist, like perfect, you know, detoxed version of what the institution can give you, and then 3 doors down there's people learning how to build, you know, weapons, missiles, and like military equipment, and the institution like has to provide for that, like by virtue of what it is as an institution.
Exactly. And so I think their role is always going to be limited, or actually not limited, very important, but important to sorry, you're so right, Ansu. It's true.
Yeah, Ansu.
They are ways of co-opting us. But I think, yeah, insofar as it's an institution, education is always going to be wrapped up in playing handmaiden of capitalism. And insofar as how could they be improved, abolishment, I think, is the only way. But education is very important. And that's why there are, of course, ways to educate each other collectively outside of an institutionalized framework.
Yes, that's really good.
Kind of like this group here, you know. Totally. Yeah, I mean, I'm in a PhD program right now, so I'm in it. And the fact, so one of the things that's interesting is that we discuss in depth the social issues, the inequalities, the environmental degradation and all of its forms, and yet I get frustrated without having forms of action or like doing something about it. We get caught in theoretical loops too in the university system, and I'm not sure. So, you know, it's like we talk about these things in ways that other people aren't talking outside of the university. Like we go into it. So it's not like people aren't thinking about this, like inequalities and, you know, like, but yeah, there's like a missing link between the university system and actually creating change in the world. And that is really problematic, you know, because there's so much energy there too. There's so many interesting people and energy going on and thinking. They're really thinking through the nuances of our challenges. And so, yeah. But I agree, the institutionalization seems to be one of those spaces where things start to get calcified and based in monetary kind of exchange, and things start breaking down.
If I think, okay, way back when I did go to university, I think I read Gramsci, and I think it was Antonio Gramsci who talked about the university as a system of control. Maybe, but you know, it's been a long time.
There's a few things about that, about the similarity between, or like going from societies of discipline and control, where you have like the family unit, then the university, then the workplace, like versus what we have now, which is, I guess, I don't know much about that, but it's just triggered something I remembered distantly.
But to your question about networks, Kelly, I think I'm not sure what the reading was getting at, whether networks represent a different diffusion of power. And I suppose I agree with that to a certain extent. Just, you know, generationally, I know that, you know, with the advent of the internet, you know, access definitely has make things more available to everybody. But the insidious thing is that that power is reproduced through the networks. So there's a certain type of model of a way of being, and that is reproduced through the networks. I don't know, people may want to challenge me because maybe there's more on Instagram than I'm not seeing, but
No, you're right, Ansu, there's not.
Today I was reading The Cybernetic Hypothesis, an essay published by Tikkun, where it was talking about how the internet was developed as a military strategy so that networks can't be blocked, and also that the internet was developed alongside the atomic bomb in the same group of thinkers, the Manhattan Project. So the internet was developed directly out of military strategy as a way to track bodies and like machinery in space, and thus has been like deployed to the actual tracking of human bodies and other species, whatever, etc. And so yeah, anyway, bye Diego. I'm not going to go on too long, but I agree with what you're saying.
Diego.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Diego. Well, one thing just in response to that, there's a book called New Power, and it's fairly recently published, and it is about the kind of looking back at structures that can be done subversively through the internet, even if it was created by this, you know, system that we want to push back against. It's so sprawling that they can't fully control it. And so I think that that's the kind of thesis of the book, that there's this new power that's arising in this age that, you know, if we can get to grips with it, like there might be some leverage there for us to network and get past these these control points, so to speak. I haven't read it, so I just read a summary and had it recommended. So, but anyway, it was really interesting to me, and I'm going to read it. So I'll get back to you guys on that.
I just whoever recommended that last reading, thank you for introducing me to that author. In her own way, I think she's like the bell hooks of this age or something. It's really, really cool.
The syllabus was put together by a colleague of Kelly and mine, who worked also for a long time for Helen and Newton Harrison, and is currently one of the people who help invigilate the online courses that Fritjof Capra does on the systems view of life. So we commissioned this syllabus from her. So she put this together as a way to share for free with people some of the basic ideas that she's gleaning from that course. But then she also added her own interpretation of some of that. So her name is Ruth Ann Barnett, and she's also has a couple of PhDs. So she's a I think really interested in balancing scholarly writing and the communication of complex ideas in more popular and available literature. Would you say that's true, Kelly?
Yeah, definitely. She studied linguistics and has a PhD in linguistics, and then became a lawyer and has all these interesting connections. But yeah, she's brought together. It's been interesting for me to explore the syllabus, because I don't know if I would have brought together the same readings, and like it's interesting to see it through another lens.
I think, you know, the bottom line for this syllabus was about culture, and the idea that in moving forward, if there is to be any moving forward, we all in some way have to agree on some basic principles about systems thinking to be ecologically literate. So I think where this particular syllabus for Metabolic Studios Learning and Mending came in was the idea that it would be good to try and put together something like a primer of like what a systems view of life might look like, not like it is the syllabus, but at least it's a try. So Kelly and I have been trying to make notes after each of these sessions so that we can adapt and listen carefully to what all of you have to say, because it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to put a series of readings together for people that we can talk to. So that, again, the spine of this has been Fritjof Capra's systems thinking, systems view of life, but through Ruth Ann Barnett's lens on it, as filtered through Kelly and
and reinterpreted by us, which is great.
But yeah, she's chosen not to come to the actual readings, which has been probably because it's hard to sort of take a step back sometimes when you put together a syllabus and let it just be itself, be its own thing.
Mm-hmm. Without, then adding your interpretation so strongly that you can't let other people just digest it. Yeah.
In the sense that this is a real, I want to applaud you, because I think in a sense, I'm just, reflecting on the reading and the discussion today, but in a sense, this is like the model of praxis understanding that I think does have a stronger impact than the formalized way of doing it in universities, in which the product of these readings and discussions might be a paper that's really only intelligible to your colleagues in the university. And there you close the book, whereas this has a more organic and shared reality to it, which is cool.
Yeah, I have to totally agree, Ansu. It's been interesting for me because I've been in all these graduate seminars, and the qualitative difference of my experience here is really palpable. Like it's really, I'm even having a hard time thinking of the words to describe what that is, but there's something different that's being created here, and I really appreciate it.
I mean, and there was another reading, I don't know when it was, but it was maybe like an Italian sounding name where, oh gosh, Lauren, you'll have to tell me what it was. It was about that all language really can only really be poetry. I'm so sorry, I forget the reference, but it was maybe not the Anna Tsing's book, but before that, there was that ultimate reading about language. And this recent reading here, The Sensuous Knowledge, had the same effect of deconstructing the knowledge game, and knowledge as an emotion, which is what I've always felt, is that when you know something by emotion, you don't know it separate from your emotion, and the neuroscience backs it up. And the academy is impervious to that.
Well, I know it's getting late. Next week, we're going to be talking about ecology, the living household that we all share. Love that topic. But it's time to probably wrap up. Thank you guys for hanging in.
Wait, are we doing current events tonight?
Oh, current events.
Thank
Let's
you
do
all.
We can squeeze in.
Anybody, the last hangers in with current events.
Yeah.
And then number 14. I'll try to keep this really brief, but let me share my screen here. Cool. All right, so the first article we've got is this from Science Magazine, mind-blowing. Grizzly bear DNA maps onto indigenous language families. Sent in by Ansu, and really appreciate that. So I'm encouraging other folks, if they're if you find coming across really cool articles, go and share with us with the info@Metabolic Studio email address. So this article kind of starts with researchers in coastal British Columbia trying to set out to find why grizzly bears in the area had recently began to colonize islands in the coast of British Columbia. And so scientists and indigenous wildlife managers wanted to know why the grizzlies were making this move. So they partnered with the region's 5 First Nation communities, and then the collaborative really set out to figure out what's going on and how these mainland grizzly bears are genetically similar to the island ones. So the researchers went out in helicopters in really remote places in British Columbia and set up piles of sticks and leaves and like a concoction of different fish oils and fish slurry to really attract the bears. And next to that was like a square of barbed wire, which the researchers assured was harmless, snagged the tufts of bear fur, which researchers were able to analyze for DNA. What they found was really interesting. So they found 3 different distinct genetic groups of grizzly bears on the mainland. And what was surprising was there's no physical barriers keeping the genetically grouping of bears separated. There's no waterways or mountains that really separated the bears and kept them in their populations. And so what was even more fascinating is that the geographic barriers of the grizzly bear populations matched up almost exactly with the language maps and the indigenous family groups that were present there. So the grizzly bears were within living within the language family boundaries, which actually wasn't all that surprising to one of the scientists belonging to one of the local First Nation communities there. The scientists really saw firsthand in their own community how the bears and humans have very similar needs, like the needs in terms of space, food, and other resources, and the steady supply of salmon that both fed the humans and the grizzlies. So there's no need to travel outside of the area for food. Kind of some of the implications of the study were that managing resources should be we should both have the interests of humans and animals in mind, and that local knowledge and localized management is really crucial. That kind of really ties back into our reading of the knowledge systems, that the scientists had only looked at the genetic distribution of the grizzlies. They would still kind of wondering why the bears kept within their own boundaries, but it wasn't until looking at the indigenous knowledge of local landscapes and the salmon stock was accounted for, it clearly showed the relationship between the indigenous language family's boundaries and the grizzly bears territories as well. So that was a really fascinating read. And then next up we've got this article from phys.org, widespread cultural diffusion of knowledge started 400,000 years ago. So a bit of background, a primer into the article. It was until recently that archaeologists believe that cultural diffusion started about 70,000 years ago when Homo sapiens started to disperse. And cultural diffusion kind of defined as the widespread distribution of objects, techniques, or particular practices by humans or hominins. And in hominins, is the taxonomic family that modern humans, Homo sapiens, Australopithecus, which we descend from. You might remember Lucy from the early remains found in Africa, and kind of linking our ancestry to, as well as bonobos and chimpanzees belong to the hominin family. So kind of going back to the article, researchers from Leiden University in the Netherlands found evidence of knowledge and skills of fire that may have been exchanged via social networks as far as 400,000 years ago, like huge, more time leap than what we had thought previously. The team of researchers looked at traces of fire by hominins at archaeological sites in various places across the world, and they found comparable traces or combinations of traces like charcoal or carbonized bones and stones that were subjected to heat. But it wasn't because of the early predecessors of human traveled to really great distances and they found these, similar techniques used across the world, but or they developed. Each of these groups kind of developed it independently, but the researchers really believe that there were these kind of techniques and knowledge of raw materials were passed along through primitive social networks. And then this theory, it was also really supported by archaeological findings of a particular stone tool that were used in a somewhat later period too. So it really got me thinking, and the researchers have a bigger question in mind of what made it possible for widespread cultural diffusion 400,000 years ago. And kind of going back to our reading from the systems view of life today, a culture is created by a social network involving multiple feedback loops, which values, beliefs, and rules of conduct are continually communicated, modified, and sustained. Further in the text said, social networks also produce a shared body of knowledge, including information, ideas, and skills that shape the culture's distinctive way of life, in addition to its values and beliefs. The meaningful knowledge continually modified by the network of communications is passed on from generation, together with the values, beliefs, and rules of conduct. So, it really got me thinking about what kind of values and beliefs or rules of conduct what we might have shared with pre-Homo sapiens, early ancestors of 400,000 years ago. So what are some of the things that our cultures have been shaped by, stories and beliefs that have been passed down through time? It's kind of interesting to tie back the early ancestors of humans into history and seeing, different social networks that might have existed 400,000 years ago. And then lastly, we've got this really great read from Wired magazine called Flower versus Power. It really talks about the issue of a proposed lithium mine in Nevada, in an area known as Rhyolith Ridge, which threatens the only known area for a species of buckwheat, or Times buckwheat. And it's the only place on earth that doesn't exist. And so really the article follows Naomi Fraga, a conservation director at the California Botanical Garden, who is trying to save the buckwheat, and there's really clash of the two different interests that are going on there. So a little background on the times of buckwheat is it kind of survives on a soil that lacks phosphorus or nitrogen and is a really extremely alkaline soil, and thousands of years have led that buckwheat to adapt to the surroundings, and no kind of known competitor exists in the ecosystem that kind of thrives in that toxic soil, except for the lithium mine, which recently proposed and kind of moving forward, it seems like, with the company, an Australian company, as we did with a lot of the Australian mining companies across the world, named Ioneer. They've got mining rights to the ridge. And researchers are really trying frantically to do as much research as they can on the buckwheat and to get it listed as an endangered species, trying to protect it. What's this kind of idea between moving into renewable energy for the mine will actually, estimates are be enough enough lithium to extract it to power about 400 electric cars a year for at least a quarter century. And the value of the mine and the boron and lithium that's there is valued at over $10 billion. But the mine will actually end up swallowing over 60% of the buckwheat's habitat. And even in phase 2 of the project, will hold close to about 90% of the habitat. But of course, the miners are saying, the mining company is saying, we're the friend of the buckwheat, we want it to exist, and we'll pay for it to be replanted elsewhere. But research at the University of Nevada, Reno is showing that's not even possible because of the soil that it needs is very special to it being to existing. And what even complicates it further is the only source of the funding for the buckwheat research is coming from the mining company too. And so it's kind of just feeding itself, but in a way in competition with one another. And then the folks who are on the buckwheat side are really, to quote from the article, is the mine may be a death sentence to a species that could live on, evolve, contribute in ways that we have not had time to comprehend. And protecting this plant is a service to both future ourselves and our species. But at the same time, the other side, the folks who are going through the lithium mine, are saying that if the mine doesn't exist to extract the lithium crucial for battery technology, the buckwheat and other species are doomed because of climate change. And buckwheat is just one casualty in this investment to green energy. The article is really interesting, really great read. I encourage you to get in there. But it kind of all at the end, it kind of talks about like the value and culture. And going back to our reading, like, culture affirms the boundaries of what we know is what we find important and what's not important. So the article is this kind of debate between the potential value of studying the buckwheat and finding a value that's humanly possible to create, or a value that's that for us humans to make it listed as an endangered species and be using it to protect the Endangered Species Act. Or even just finding and studying out why it's survived in such a harsh environment, and if it's worth protecting. If they're at the other side, which the lithium mining proponents is saying, that the harsh reality of climate change, we really need the lithium storage, and that area actually has a vast amount of lithium to pull out with. It was a really interesting read, and he was kind of curious to see where this goes to. This was kind of a race from researchers and conservationists to really figure out, to make the case to the Bureau of Land Management to really protect the buckwheat's habitat, and also to get it listed as an endangered species. Yeah, so that's about it for the for the articles this week. I'll pass it over back to you, Kelly.
Okay. Wow. Those are 3 really interesting articles, particularly like that. I mean, wow. Okay. And yeah, hopefully, do we have a space where people can see those articles and read them, right, guys? Because if not, we should.
I'll share them in the chat right now.
Yeah, share them in the chat. I want to read them closer. Awesome.
I thought that first article was such a perfect segue to Ansu's last comment about poetry and language, and this whole idea of, the idea that human language and grizzly bear language might be kind of connected. Fascinating.
Okay.
Well, we're gonna just keep going till next week.
Let's see if we get the longest Zoom ever.
Yeah, this might be the longest Zoom ever.
Well, let's go next week and see how far we can go.
Till we crash Zoom servers.
Yeah. It was worth it. It was worth it for me, at least.
Thank you, Kelly, for everything. Thank you, everybody. I'm gonna sign off. Good night.
Time to sign off. Good night, everyone. See you next week.
Good night. Bye.
Night all.